Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to Comic Talk with Ryan Murphy. I'm here and I'm very blessed to be here with someone who's had an extraordinary career in the comic book field, the former executive editor of DC Comics, in fact. So quite a grab. We have Mike Carlin with us here today. So thank you very much for being on the show.
Where else was I going to be?
So, what we typically do here is kind of go through a progression of sort of series of events that lead us to the modern day. And I suppose with you, a quick Wikipedia search, can show us that you obviously your career goes back with Marvel and DC goes back even to as early as an internship in high school. Of
Yep.
course, we're fortunate enough to be growing up in New York, but obviously to get sort of a that kind of art internship, and then I think you were actually going to a sort of an art-based high school and went on to, art uh, major in college. So you were clearly very gifted from an early age to be able to get those opportunities. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I guess I did have to take a test to get into the High School of Art and Design. I don't know how gifted I am because I was never able to make a career out of doing art. But I learned enough about art that I could be articulate about it, and that would help me when I became an editor to, you know, first spot good artists and or appropriate artists for whatever material we were putting together, and then also be able to kind of, you know, uh, direct them.
Mhm. Yeah. And obviously, I'm just going to assume Yankees for you.
Oh no, 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 no. No, I'm from the borderline of Bushwick, Brooklyn, and Queens. So
Okay. That's all the way then. Okay.
my one bus ride away was to the World's Fair in 1964 and to Shea Stadium.
Fantastic. I come from a family of Cub lovers, so you're here in the Midwest.
Well, I went to art school, so there wasn't a whole lot of baseball talk going on anyway.
But as you get into getting a job at Marvel, you kind of come from an art background, but must have just realized at some point that you could write as well, which is always very interesting to me when find people who are multi-talented because I couldn't, if I, to be able to do two things that are very sort of different talents, both very well, is very impressive for
Well,
anyone. So.
the reality is that all you have to do is you just have to sit down and write. You don't know how to do it. You can't really learn how to do it. And same thing with drawing, it's like there is a point where you're relying on somebody else noticing and thinking you can do it. And that is also very good for your confidence. But it's also like that's who decides, if the an editor or someone who's got the keys to the paychecks decides they're going to take a chance on you, and uh, uh, at the same time, if you want to write and draw, you can just do that even if you don't get paid. Even if nobody else tells you you can write, all you have to do is write. And it's even if it's just something that you show to your friends or to your mother or to whoever that encourages you, that's a good thing. So the fact that I have a career as a writer, it really does boil down to the fact that when I was an intern at DC, I wanted to draw comics. My favorite artist was Neil Adams at the time, same as everybody maybe, and I I just in my head I would see my drawings if Neil Adams drew them, and then when I would actually draw them, they came out like shitty Mike Carlin drawings, and they were just not good enough. And when I was an intern at DC, one of my jobs was to Xerox the artwork that came in, both pencils and inks. And I was Xeroxing artwork by people like Bernie Wrightson and Walt Simonson and Jack Kirby and anything that came in. And the editors would just say, "Here, I need two copies of this." And I would be the guy photocopying. I would get a look at this stuff and I would despair because I was like, I'm never going to be able to do this. I don't have the patience to learn how to do everything. Because if you're drawing comic books, you have to be able to draw anything at any time. It's not
Mhm.
like you can be a guy who specializes in horses and that's what you make your name as, because chances are there's not a lot of horse superheroes. There's not a lot of horse comic strips, although that might be an idea right there. Uh, it's it, you just can't specialize. You have to be versatile. You have to be able to draw a car, and you have to be able to draw a fat guy, and you have to be able to draw women and mice and buildings and you name it, and you don't get to name it because the writer gets to name it. And unless you write your own stuff, and then you can just steer away from stuff you're bad at. Uh, and ultimately, I just said, I'm not good enough for this, so I'm going to be a funny artist. And back then, there was a few more outlets for that. There's not a lot of outlets for that. There was Mad Magazine, there was National Lampoon, there was the New Yorker magazine, and some other magazines would print cartoons here and there. But there was also like Cracked was a mad kind of copycat, and Marvel had their own version of Mad Magazine, which was called Crazy Magazine. So I finished the internship. I concentrated on writing jokes. I am a funny guy sometimes. I've been told that. And I went to college. I went to the School of Visual Arts, and I had uh, Harvey Kurtzman and Will Eisner as my teachers. And obviously, they're both very different from each other as well. Uh, Eisner being a very straight, serious, storytelling oriented guy, and Harvey being a more gag comic
Mhm.
uh, specialist. So, it just was like I had all of this stuff like in front of me, and I just needed to pick and choose what I thought I was best at. And so when I got out of college, I just cold called Crazy Magazine because Mad was pretty much a closed shop. It was the same artists all the time, and they were great. And Cracked, I never knew who owned Crack, or it seemed a little more fly by night to me. I don't know. That may have been just the wrong impression, but it was my impression. So I called up the art director of Crazy Magazine, who was Marie Severin, and she basically said she would be happy to look at my portfolio, but I didn't need to show it to her. I need to show it to the editor, who was Larry Hama. And when I went in to see Larry, I gave him my portfolio, and he looked through it, and he goes, "Well, your drawing is bad, but I like your jokes." And I had come to the same conclusion, so I wasn't upset or anything. It was just like, well, of course, this guy knows what he's talking about. And I walked out of there having my own regular monthly page in the back of Crazy Magazine, uh, writing and drawing my own stuff. So that's when I became a writer. I was doing it anyway. I had all these sketchbooks filled with just jokes and gags and all kinds of things. Anything that occurred to me, I would do a drawing of, and hopefully it would be funny for somebody. And after I showed my portfolio to Larry, he goes, "Well, I don't want to buy any of these things that you prepared for Crazy Magazine, but do you have anything else?" And I showed him my sketchbooks, and he goes, "Why don't you just give me a page of all these jokes?" And I was like, "Okie doke, you're the boss." And I did that, and within about 6 months, I had another feature in Crazy Magazine, and that's how I ended up writing and drawing comics. Uh, it didn't hurt that it was up at Marvel Comics
Mhm.
because then I was just around the office dropping off stuff. And when an assistant editor position opened, they came to me and said, "Do you want to be an assistant editor?" And I said, "Yeah, what's that?" didn't really know what the job entailed, but I guess I could figure it out, right? I'll earn while I learn. And I figured it out. And then 40 years later, I retired from DC.
Oh, that's fantastic. And the DC, the move to DC, I'm not, I think it was, so I have some notes here, like 86, you moved to DC. By at least by 92, you were the editor of the Superman titles. And of
Mhm.
course, elephant in the room, 92 Superman.
Don't call
Uh,
me that.
so I'm sorry.
Don't call me that.
But no, like 92 Superman, of course, anyone who knows their stuff is thinking the same thing. And that I think the whole I think I read this in a magazine a long time ago, is that maybe this was you in the story, but I read that they were just a lot of the Superman writers like Dan Jurgens and probably yourself and everybody were sitting around a table. They're like, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna? And then someone yelled out, why don't we just kill him? You know?
Yeah. That's partly the way it went down. The reality of it all was when I got fired from Marvel,
Hmm.
I was picked up by DC, which was great. And I was one of the Superman editors right from the first day I got there.
Yeah.
But it was because I was working with John Byrne, who I had worked with at Marvel on Fantastic Four. So we'd already established a relationship. We'd gotten along, and I'm sure he put in the word for me uh, to get in at DC. Then John Byrne quit, and that was when I became the editor of Superman for real, not just you know, in the credit box. And I stuck with Jerry Ordway and I hired Roger Stern for Marvel, and we were doing two books a month. And then Dan Jurgens added a third title onto that. And it was just our desire to try to have what happened in one book relate to the next book. So what I established was this thing called the Super Summit, where we would all get together and discuss the next year's worth of Superman stories. And everybody came in with ideas, and everybody came in with I would draw these giant charts with boxes for each issue of the year. So that'd be 48 boxes because it was only three or four titles. And we would just fill them in and follow how the story was going to progress. And we decide as a group where the big high beats were and how does Superman get out of this over here, what's happening to the supporting cast all along, blah, blah, blah. Every time we would get stuck and it was clear that the room was drying up or we were tired or whatever, Jerry Ordway would holler out, let's just kill him. And it was a joke and he was only kidding. But when we got to the 1992 issues, we had planned to have Lois and Clark get married in Adventures number 500. But Jeanette Kahn, who was the president of DC, and myself, we knew that there was a show coming along called Lois and Clark. And everybody thinks that Hollywood stepped in and said, don't have them get married. But that's not the case. We didn't ask anybody. We just decided that if there's going to be a TV show, we should wait and do the wedding at the same time as the TV show. And so if the TV show is a hit, we'll get to the wedding eventually. If the TV show bombs, we can get to the wedding as soon as we want. But now we have to fill in the gap. And everybody was mad because they were all like, but we had already planned out this other story. What if I'm not on the team by the time you get to do this wedding? This is what I wanted to do and all this stuff. And they were right to be mad.
Mhm.
So basically, it was said again in the room, let's just kill him. And I said, okay, wise guys, if we kill him, what happens after that? And the room came up with the funeral for a friend section of that storyline. And it was great. And we all knew it was great. And we all, and Dan Jurgens had come to the meeting wanting to do just a big monster who was like a force of nature. something that would be really give Superman a hard time because we all realized a lot of the villains we made up were, like Lex Luthor, they were guys in business suits. But here's Superman, a very physical character, and what ultimately became Doomsday was literally like a force of nature. The idea for this character, because he doesn't have a personality really, was that he's a hurricane, or he's an earthquake. He's definitely something that Superman would try to handle, but probably couldn't. So the actual death is not even a story. It's the beginning of a story. And the funeral for a friend is the middle of the story. And then through other circumstances, we saw how popular this was going to be because the news grabbed a hold of this and decided it was the story of the year. And we were selling so many copies that we said, oh man, we better come up with a better way to get him back to life than what we had because he was going to really basically just sit up in his coffin and say, I'm back. Hey, sorry, everybody. I didn't mean to miss out on 3 months of worth of comics. But all the writers and artists they wanted to bring Superman back drastically different so that the world would be surprised again. But nobody could agree on which version they wanted to do. And Louise Simonson said, let's just do them all. And it was great because for a little while, each title didn't have to connect to the other books. And they could explore their own little version of Superman, who we would find out wasn't really Superman. And it was a perfect storyline and year, which had a great 3-act premise. It was like the fight and then the aftermath and then how do we get Superman back? So it was really it was not luck, but it was harnessing very talented people when they were a little mad and focusing that energy into a story. It's easy to do a story about two guys killing each other when you're mad. So it worked out great for us.
I was like, yeah, that's, I mean, anyone watching this or listening to this right now, I mean, who knows comics knows so much about that story. But I mean, there's some insights in there about like that you just said, like, we all know there was the four Supermen. I didn't know that there was, someone just said, that just came from different, ideas. That's such a wonderful sort of insight in there and just,
Well,
yeah,
and again, if there's a talent that an editor can have, it's just to have your eyes open for when the good idea comes in the door. Because I never pretended to be like I wasn't the guy who was writing the music. I was
of
really just conducting it,
course,
and
yeah.
that was a great fun thing to be a part of. It was so huge. I knew then that I would be talking about it for 30 years, and here I am.
Yeah. And of course, yeah, then you get the job to be executive editor, which you worked for 6 years. Exciting time. You hand that off, I believe, to Dan Dio, who's had his own, moment where there was, but every sort of executive editor has these periods that they're in charge of that have these exciting things happen. And I was trying to think of like, okay, 96 to '02, what did this guy, see happen under his umbrella? And I was like, well, that was, I think that was right when like Jeff Johns came up. Like that was like right like this and you talk about being an editor and being able to recognize talent. I mean when he that was
Yeah.
being able to recognize that at the beginning was good for you.
Well, I didn't do it by myself. There were other editors who were wanting to put him on board, and it wasn't hard. He came with my version of a pedigree is to say I studied with Will Eisner, and his version was he studied with Dick Donner, the
Mhm.
guy who made the first Superman movie, which we all think is a good movie. So it was a kind of a no-brainer to take a chance on a guy like that.
Mhm.
The thing is ultimately you don't have to stick with people if they don't work out.
Mhm.
And that to me would be what I would say about my career is that I guess I didn't drop the ball. They gave me the ball and I didn't drop the ball. And that's what anybody should hope to do if they want to have a career. If they want to be a flash in the pan, that's easy.
Mhm.
But I had my highlights. It's a little weird to say that my highlight was 30 years ago or 35 years ago at this point, but at least I have one, so that's good. I think I have a couple, which is I got to be involved in and they're just putting out now these omnibuses
Mhm.
at DC. They're doing the Superman the Triangle era, which prints all the stuff that I worked on, in the order that it came out, which is really great because that is a lot of stuff that, you can find, but it's easier to find it in one place this way. And they're planning a second one, I understand. And so that's good. Hopefully people will buy that. I don't get anything out of this, and I don't have anything to sell anymore now that I don't work there. But I am happy to say, you can go out there and read what I was involved in pretty readily now. And if people buy all these volumes, they'll get it all, and that'll be great. But I also worked on this Marvel versus DC stuff that they are collecting. In particular the Amalgam storyline, which honestly was the most fun I ever had in comics because that I got to be a fan again when I was a kid. I was buying Marvel and DC comics, and it paid off in that project. I also got to work with my best friend at Marvel, who was Mark Grunwald, and we got to, he hired me to be his assistant editor at Marvel, and we fell right back into the old groove again, where we were going to movies together and just working on this project together, and it really was just fun to try to top each other with crazy ideas. So that was probably the other big thing that I worked on during that period, and they're putting that out in omnibus form right now.
That's amazing. I mean, I definitely would encourage people to check those out because those are, yeah, it's incredible things to have worked on. I have to admit the Wikipedia page is a little vague on everything you've been up to since then.
That's why I kind of chortled because Wikipedia is at best it's like the death of Superman. It's the start of a story. It's not always the whole story. Uh, you mentioned Jeff Johns and me working with him early on in his career. One of the best things that happened to me was that in the late aughts, like 2009 and 2010, there was all these rumors that DC was going to move to California, and he called me up one day and he goes, "If editorial doesn't move to California, would you still be interested in coming to California and working with me on animated movies?" And I also studied animation in the High School of Art and Design and the School of Visual Arts. And I said, let me think about it. Yes. And mostly because I hate cold weather and I love living in California. So it was a great thing. And what I like about this part of the story is that I took a chance on Jeff and then he did a payback chance on me. And that was the last 15 years of my life in my career at DC Comics was working on the animated movies and TV shows. So that's been a lot of fun. Now I don't have a credit in a credit box on the animated movies like you get in comics, but that's okay. I got a paycheck and I had medical coverage and the people who mattered knew what I was doing. So it was, I never did any of this stuff to get a public acclaim. It really was always about just to make a living. And what I tell students when I go to a class to talk for, like whether it's an art school or any kind of class, it's like if you want to do anything in comics or movies, it's like there's only one Jim Lee at a time,
Yeah.
you know? And then there's a lot of other people who are making a living. Some of them are struggling, some of them are finding it easy. I was a guy who didn't ever like to have to hustle up my next gig. So I was a bad freelancer, but I wrote a bunch of comics and things, but I was always happy that I didn't have to go and find the steady work because I had my day job, which was editing or then what do you call it? Directing animation for DC. So it was like I always knew where I fit in, and it's a good thing to not have delusions of grandeur. The world gets to tell you if you're Jim Lee, or Joe Quesada. You pick the superstar at both companies, and it's like you don't get to decide that. It's up to the readership and viewership, and also the executives who are hiring for the big jobs in those companies. I was the executive editor for a bunch of years, and I think it was actually a little longer than 6, if you count the few years that I did it with Denny O'Neil and Archie Goodwin, even though they're great guys. I love them. But somehow, in the grand scheme of things, I ended up doing their reviews, which made no sense to me. And it was ridiculous because they were masters when I was buying comics.
Yeah,
And then I have to sit there and tell them, well, you should show up on time more often, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, it was dumb. It was just dumb. But technically, I was the head of that three-headed monster for a while too.
yeah,
Uh, but anyway, there came a point where my contract was up, and Paul Levitz, who was, a big wig, he he just said, "What do you want to do?" And I told him, I said, I can tell you what I don't want to do. I don't want to take attendance anymore. I don't want to be the guy who's getting in trouble for everything everybody else does. I want to just be an editor of comic books. And he goes, okay, you can do that. And I took a big pay cut, but I was single at the time and I didn't have any kids. So that was easy enough. And Dan DiDio was there and he was chomping at the bit to get into that end of the business. And it was just like it was good. It was a good timing thing for me to just step back. I did, though I don't think that job is a lifer job because I
hmm,
do think that a taste changed. I think you do get tired. You also want to have the variety come back because it shouldn't be about just what I think is a good idea for a comic because there's a million good ideas for comics. And it's like I had what I call a 10-year run. I had 10-year run on Superman, and then probably a 8-year run on the executive editor thing. And I was just like that'll hold me. I'm not ashamed of this, and this is all going correct. And so I stepped back and I just became an editor for a while, working with Dan DiDio for Dan DiDio. And I ended up doing weekly comics again for him because I was able to do it on Superman, which was the dumbest idea I ever had, was to try to do weekly comics because they're hard. And but I was also a good deadline guy. That's why I was concerned about our 3 o'clock meeting today. I worry about the deadline a lot. But I don't miss shipping on even on weekly comics, and that was an important thing to me and obviously to the company.
yeah.
So I did that for a long time, working with Dan, and doing things like Countdown
Oh, man.
and and what was the Trinity thing that Kurt
Yeah,
Busiek wrote?
yeah.
Uh, yeah,
I have to say, I didn't get so much into Countdown, but man, I remember being in Hills Community College in Ottumwa, Iowa, buying every issue of Countdown, every week,
yeah.
just and going just in full force and all that sort of stuff. That was
Well,
fun.
and they were struggling. The editor who was doing it first was like he was kind of like losing control of it. And I wouldn't say I ever got it under control, but I definitely again I made it much more consistent, and that was important. So I had a purpose and I served my purpose, and then I was just there when Jeff Johns wanted to do the payback call, and it worked out great. And I feel like I worked on some really fun animated shows. You know, I
Mhm.
said I studied animation in high school and college, but honestly, studying animation in the 1970s is way different than what they're doing, how they do animation in the 2020s. So I wasn't the guy doing it. I was the DC liaison because it was all done through the sister company of Warner Brothers Animation. And luckily, I'm happy to say that those animation guys, they love the DC comics just as much as we did. And there was never a lot of struggle with them. It was always just like, oh, well, if you want to have this character do this, that's not really his gig. How about you use this character instead? You know, and those kinds of things where we would try to facilitate the story they wanted to tell and try to make it more DC friendly.
Well, that yeah, like and you did a great job with those. I've been on a mission in recent years to kind of watch all the way through those that whole. I think there was just 50 some ultimately
There
animated
are a
films.
lot of them, man. I don't know how.
James Gunn is kind of putting the kibosh on it now, or whatever's going on. But
I
it's
don't. I don't think there's going to be a kibosh on it. I think it's that it. He just did the Creature Commandos thing. That's a DC show. Harley Quinn is still happening. My Adventures with Superman is still on, and I think that's a great version of Superman. And they're all kind of like Elseworlds. They're all not canonical, but uh, we have things like, and there's all these people who hate things like Teen Titans Go. It's just like, okay, I get that this is not what you think is a good idea for the characters, but every little kid on Earth thinks this is a great show. And it's the most popular thing on Cartoon Network. You can tell because they run it every minute of every day. And Marv Wolfman and George Perez actually are in a couple of episodes, so they agree that it's an okay show. It's like not everything has to be the same. You got to be willing to do new stuff, try new things to get new audiences in. If we're going to get little kids in, maybe they'll go and buy a George Perez collection down the road because they like Teen Titans Go. And I defend the show because I say, you may think that these characters are acting out of character, but they're not. They're hyperbolic versions of the real characters. They're all in character. And I think that they're just like extreme
Mhm.
versions of the characters. And it's okay if everything we do is not for you. It is
Mhm.
okay for something to be there for your little brother,
Yeah.
you know, or your grandson.
And that's still kind of what you're doing right now in today is working on being behind the scenes with some of
No,
those.
no, I guess I retired from DC about a year and a half ago.
Wow.
And no, and yeah, it was good. The never-ending battle ended, so that was good. I was definitely ready for it. DC is a company owned by Warner Brothers, and Warner Brothers is a company that's getting taken over by new companies every couple of years now. And it just was like, it's time to go. It's okay. And I'm 65. It's okay. Well, now I'm 67. It's uh, it's okay to stop now. And I was tired. I was definitely tired of it. But what I am doing now is I'm writing forewords for all these books that I worked on, for those triangle books and the amalgam books. And I got asked to write a foreword to a Thundercats collection that's coming out from a different publisher than DC, because I was the editor on the Thundercats comic when it first started at Marvel.
Mhm.
So it's fun, to be living off my old self all the time. I want to keep my name out there. That's why I wanted to do this. It's like if somebody has something they want me to do, I'm happy to hear about it. I'm definitely not. I don't consider myself retired. I'm retired from DC,
Mhm.
uh, from the day to day at DC. I'm thrilled to have time to maybe read all these books that I bought for 40 years that I didn't have time to read.
Mhm.
I look around my room while I'm talking to you, and it's just piles of books. So I want to get through it. Unfortunately, they invented streaming right before I retired, and watch more TV than I should. There's a lot of good shows out there too.
There is, absolutely. Yeah, and some of them are now DC shows. So
Well, we had our good run on the CW there for a while too. So we'll see what Mr. Gunn can put on uh, what is it, Max now it's called.
Max, yeah.
And I'm optimistic about James Gunn. I think as long as he doesn't make it too funny, the Superman movie could be really good.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
my one regret, I wish he did a Superman movie and not a DC Universe movie because it's got too many other characters for the start of something.
Yeah.
But we'll see how it goes. I think he knows what he's doing. The Peacemaker, who would have cared about the Peacemaker if anyone else had done it? You
Yeah,
know,
absolutely. No.
Everybody liked that show. And if you didn't like it, it was okay. It was just it's all about putting out the flavors. Baskin Robbins doesn't just sell vanilla and chocolate. They have 29 other flavors.
So
So,
that takes us up to today, and it's just I gotta say it's just been an absolute privilege to be here with you and to hear these stories about these eras of DC Comics. Certainly, for so many fans out there who may know a lot of those things, but not know a lot of the behind the scenes. You drop so many names, I just feel like geeking out. And but
well, the bad thing about the internet. Well, first of all, I do thank God every day that the internet was not invented during the death of Superman, because that would have been it would have been disheartening, I'm sure. I'm sure that the internet was invented just so people could complain about Michael Keaton being cast as Batman.
yeah.
And now he's everybody's favorite Batman. So that's why the internet, you got to listen with half an ear. It's not really where it's at in the grand scheme of things. But it's like, I don't know. There's room for every flavor. There's room for every taste. There's room for all these things. Let's just let people do creative things and see what happens. And again, you can always get out of it. I mean, that's the other thing is that you don't have to live with it forever. In the old days, you just wouldn't bring it up again. But, now they just start over again from scratch.
Like I said, it's been amazing having you here. And for any of our audiences, I hope people watch this and enjoy it. And just thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh, it's no problem, man. And just let me know when you're posting it or printing it or whatever you do, and I'll mention it on my Facebook page.
Fantastic. Thank you everyone for watching. This has been Comic Talk with Ryan Murphy, and we hope to see you next time.
Good night.